So the origin of the Cockpit experience sprint was started with Chris taking a look at the overall experience of the player within a ship cockpit and wanting to make that experience as visceral as possible. He looked at sights and sounds and effects and just the overall feeling of it and wanting to make it really feel special. And so we all kind of got together and brainstormed different things that we wanted to see. Chris laid out his expectations. And then John Crew, lead tech designer there in the UK, and I partnered up to make this happen. So John and I sat down and outlined Chris's goals into what we're calling a sprint breakdown. So we started with, okay, here's our expectation for the first sprint, then the next sprint, and a sprint can be 2 weeks long, 2 to 3 weeks, usually around 2 weeks long. And we started with, just what does it feel like to be in a cockpit, flying around? And so we partnered up with animation, lead ship animator Jay Brushwood in Austin. We partnered up with audio team, with visual effects, engineering, to make this just an overall amazing experience while flying the ship. We got our design laying out the expectations, specifically breaking down the tasks based on the high-level direction from Chris. That included things like G-forces, updated G-forces, and how does that feel? Hit reactions in the cockpit, so when someone's shooting and firing, you're not just standing there static, but you're actually reacting to the hits of the ship. And then what happens inside that cockpit whenever you are getting hit by another ship. So we have actual effects that play in the ship cockpit, air decompression and then flames sometimes, and the lighting changes depending on whether you're just in default mode, if you have auxiliary power running, or if you're in an emergency state. It's time to get out, it's time to eject. So we definitely wanted to make that feel real and as if you were actually in danger. At first, we focused on just one cockpit type. So we took the Gladius as a test case, which uses our specific cockpit type, what we're calling the HOTAS CL. And there are 7 or 8 ships that use that cockpit type, and so we focused just on those 7 or 8 ships and to make those really feel special. So what we did was we took the Gladius cockpit and we said, okay, how can we change the interior of this cockpit to make it look make it feel and look different to the expectations that Chris is looking for. So we actually shifted the seat a little bit. We changed the positioning of the throttle and joystick. We adjusted the position of the front weapon, ship weapon, so that when you're firing the weapon, you can actually see the muzzle from where you're sitting in the cockpit. And as a result, you see the muzzle effects as well. So not only are you seeing what's going on inside your cockpit, but you can actually see the effects of when you're firing your weapon and stuff as well.
It's a huge ongoing process. We've obviously got so many ships that we just can't do everything we want to do with them all in one release. For 3.0, we're starting with what we call the HOTAS CL ships, which is an animation template. So that's Gladius, Buccaneer, Herald, Cutlass, Sabre, Vanguard, and they're all getting a range of improvements to the cockpit, which will hopefully make the overall experience much more enjoyable.
In previous versions of the game, we had no visual cues on whether your vehicle was damaged or not. We only had a simple implementation where we had some damage effects playing when your ship was about to explode, but that was very simple and not very informative. So we wanted to represent different stages of being damaged. So slightly damaged, medium damage, heavy damage. And we also wanted to inform player that their vehicle is actually being shot at this very moment. So we created some VFX such as sparks, smoke, fire, like debris, charges, and things like that. So whenever your vehicle is being hit, you will see some effects playing. Also, depending on the health level of your vehicle, you will see more or less of these kind of damage effects. So we took these effects, I kind of placed them manually, and using basic implementation, we incorporated that into game to see whether it works, whether it's giving enough information for the player, and because it does, we'll take it a level further and we'll create like a proper implementation of that.
So the improvements First up, we're tying in the actor status system. So you've seen that with all the breathing and stamina, that's now tied into the G-force system from the ships. So as you suffer G-force from your actions in the ship, it causes stress, which builds up stamina, makes you consume more oxygen. It actually changes your breathing in the ship, so you get all the, like you see fighter pilots have to do various breathing techniques to manage their breathing under high G-force. So as you're pulling high G-forces, you're going to hear that physical change on your character. If you ever got to the state where you were pulling so much G-force and you suddenly got out the ship, you would feel that stamina effect. You're not instantly getting out the ship back at full stamina. You're paying the price for your actions previously. Another aspect is ensuring the UI screens on the cockpits are of a consistent and minimum size on screen, because a lot of our cockpits were done 2-3 years ago, and the UI has significantly changed with 3.0, and we need to make sure there's a minimum amount of screen space dedicated to these UI elements so you can actually read them without having to zoom in, because there's lots of issues with some ships where to read them you have to zoom all the way in to read the text, which in the middle of combat is not something ideal. So we've got templates for all the screens going across those. That's why you'll have seen in previous ATVs, things like the Gladius cockpit screens have changed. They were way too small to be visible, so we've brought them closer to the player, made them larger. We've angled them in towards the player to reduce reflections, and added more of them. We're also bringing back the combat visor interface, which you see up on the top left and top right of your screen. So you can have, they're essentially support screens, so you could move information from your support screens up to those if you want, but by default they're your self status and the target or pin target status, so you can get an overview of those. Another thing is we've worked with the animation team about the poses in the cockpits. So across all of our 60 plus ships, we have about 6 to 10 different poses. So every ship fits one of those poses. There's a few that are unique, like the Nox, but pretty much every other one is used across multiple ships, which dictates the throttle, seat, control or yoke status, as well as a range where they can interact within the cockpit. So over time, we've picked templates for certain ships, modeled the ships around those. As we found, they've been adhered to in various levels of accuracy. So you'll find one ship had the template put in. When the artist was modeling them, they thought, oh, maybe if I move the joystick 1 centimeter to the left, that looks better in this cockpit, which is fine. The IK solution can deal with that. But then what happened was the next artist came along and went, well, that ship uses that template, so I will use that template that they've got in that ship. So I'll take their geometry. Oh, but this is actually, well, if I move this another centimetre to the left, it fits this ship better. So over time, some of the joysticks have got further and further away from the player. So when you get in the seats and the animation plays, which is the same animation of grabbing the sticks, you get this horrible snap where they go to the actual poses. So for those ships earlier that I listed, we've redone all the controls. They've all come back to the default position, which we actually changed. So every ship had to change to match it, because what we had decided was the template actually wasn't as good as it could be. So all the ships have their joysticks and throttles changed slightly. They've all been remodeled to fit the hands better. They've all got buttons on the control inputs. So we've got enough geometry and animations to play with for firing your guns. You can move buttons on it. Using afterburner or boost, you can use buttons on the sticks. We've gone through all the screens, which are now larger. They now all have buttons on there, so all the future actions will be interacting with the cockpit, have space. One of Chris's goals was someone that only knows how to use interaction mode can sit in the cockpit and just use that to work out what everything does in the ship. So they'll be able to go into interaction mode and work out how to turn the ship on just by looking around the ship, looking at the buttons that highlight, looking at the feedback they get, and be able to do everything from that.
Primarily what the animators are doing is we're working on, tuning in the G-force experience so it feels properly, where the camera sits in the cockpit in relation to, where you see all your UI and stuff like that. Finalizing finger poses, adding in, idles and, kind of fidgets, and anything that kind of, can breathe life to the cockpit. I mean, it's something that we've been focused on over the last 3 or 4 months, and there's still more work to do. There's always room for improvement, but I think for the 3.0 release, we're going to be at a healthy spot that'll give a lot of players some satisfaction flying around. We're improving our technology and we're improving the animations that we're doing, but we're also putting in these systems that can rely on the overall health state of the ship. So, the UK programming team have implemented hit reaction animations that happen based off of what direction you're getting hit from all 6 axes. And they blend together, and basically you get jostled around in the cockpit on the direction that you're going. And that gets overlaid on top of the character animating his hands and, throttle and joystick. And in addition to that, the overall posing, fighting of G-forces that we have for the third person. So it's kind of a culmination of a lot of different things. There is like a lot of technology overlap between animation and design and the programming team, to get the overall desired effect. And, we have review gate meetings where we all take a look at it, look for ways to improve it, think about new features like, maybe the health of your ship gets to, a certain percentage, then the red lights start blinking, there's fires going on, there's sparks flying, emergency lights are going, and then that way you have to, hit the eject button. The G-force animations and the blend spaces we're using are all hooked into the IFCS system that drives the ship. So we're using actual G-force simulations that result in a blended animation state for a particular set of G-forces coming from X, Y, and Z.
The objective is to make it feel like a living, breathing vehicle. It's not just you press a random button on your keyboard or HOTAS and stuff happens. It's that's tied to a specific action which will have an in-game reaction to that. So you press the engine on button in the cockpit, will move and rotate, and long term your character will go out and interact with that automatically to do that when you press the button. So your finger will reach out and touch it, twist it, whatever the button is. The first step is getting all those buttons mapped out in the cockpit and interactive. The next step is those buttons animating themselves. So you do the action in interaction mode, or you press the shortcut key, you see a physical reaction for those things. And then the final step is the whole player leaning out, touching it, which is another reason why we've had to adjust all the cockpit screens so they're all within arm's reach of you, because we don't want the player to, you press a shortcut key whilst you're flying to change something. You don't want your character leaning forward, like bent double, trying to reach a button that was too far away, because that's just it's gonna mess with your view. It's gonna be unpleasant to deal with. On top of the animation unification, we've also changed how our enslavement process works between seats and players, which massively simplifies setup across the board. So when you're sat in a seat, that allows you to do other actions that you could do standing up. So for instance, it instantly allows you to do upper body animations that are set up anywhere else. You don't have to set up, say for the Gladius, an emote for saluting. That would have had to be a Gladius specific emote, whereas now we can have a HOTAS CL emote that works across all those ships, and probably in fact across all of them. So the actor enslavement's changed, which is great.
So we've had a lot of new kind of technologies in place specifically for the cockpit to make it feel a lot more visceral. Romulo Espinosa, who's one of our gameplay programmers in the UK, has been a really huge help with that, changing kind of the way the seats are set up, the way the the IK in the arms work so that you can have a little bit more reach and things like that. So, there's been a lot of different new features developed just for this sprint that enable the artists and the animators and the visual effects artists to make their stuff look as great as possible and feel as good as possible.
For the cockpit experience, we had to implement a different type of enslavement. So what we were doing before this new enslavement, we were using the old one. So for the old one, what we had was 2 ADBs. ADB is just an animation database with all the animations we use for that entity. So in the old enslavement, we had one for the vehicle and one for the seat. And then all the animations were being put there. But the point with that is we were deactivating the player basically. So it was the seat who was saying, I need you to play this animation, which is stored on my database. But in this case, that's for our project, that's madness, because if you need any animations on the player, you need to copy those animations into this seat. So if you need to play emotes, you need to fire your weapon while you are seated or wherever, you need to add all those animations into every single ADB. And we have a bunch of ADBs, one per seat. So it's impossible. So we created this new enslavement, which is the seat is still in charge, is who says, I want you to play this animation, but the player is still active. So the player itself can play animations. So we don't need anymore to add those animations into every single ADB. We just say, I want you to play this animation, player, and because it's on you, it's up to you to play it. So the player is just gonna do it. You have 2 options really. You can enslave the player to the seat or on the other way around. But in this case, the seat can move. Or we have these animations with the canopy opening and stuff like that. So you want the player to move accordingly to the seat and not on the other way around. We don't want the player to stand up and then the seat move or wherever. What you want is you want to move the seat and then the player react according to that movement. So that's why we enslave the player to the seat and not on the other way around.
Another part of the sprint is setting up the light group and light group transitions for cockpits. So it's something we've had in our multi-crew ships is the damage states, VFX and lighting triggers. So when your ship is damaged, you have all this cool VFX and lighting of the ship in an emergency state, but we never really had that on the single-seaters. So we've started doing that in those ships. So rather than just purely relying on the UI element telling you you're low on health, which when you don't have the CVI in 263 is incredibly hard to tell, where you've got the cockpit lights flashing red, we've got all the damage effects of smoke, flames coming in the cockpit, so it really does hammer it home what state your ship is in, and then when you repair it all goes away and it all goes backwards and forwards.
For the cockpit experience for the VFX team, it's more about the damage, specifically directional feeling of the damage. So currently in the game we do have interior damage, but it's not really a directional, so you don't really get a proper sense of where the attack is coming from.
All the VFX are coming from the cockpit model itself. We are not creating the cockpit, we are taking whatever is being created and we are making sense out of it. So you won't see random effects coming from random places. It is thinking about what would happen, like what devices are on in the cockpit and what type of distraction you would see in an actual vehicle of that type. There's a lot of thought put into that. Placement of effects has to be done manually, so each vehicle has a different cockpit, so I need to manually place these effects so it makes sense. We don't want, for example, fire coming off a fire extinguisher, unless it's made in UK, but that's a whole nother story. So yeah, the placement is done manually, but we are creating like a library of effects. So I can use the same effects I made for Gladius on another vehicle, but it will look different just because the context is different. These VFX are coming from different objects and locations, so it is making a huge difference.
When you're in the cockpit, the type of effects you're going to see will be sparks, smoke, nothing that's going to be too kind of in your face so you can't see where you're going, because you're not going to want that necessarily, are you? Unless you really are in big trouble, and that is new compared to what we've currently got in the game. Currently in the game, it's either, the damage is either on or off really, so you don't really get a sense of where anything's coming from.
So for the cockpit experience, we always try to give the player more feedback. So we decided to create like different blend spaces for hit reactions and pass out and wake up animations. So basically a blend space is just is an asset that allows us to have any number of animations and blend between them according to different inputs. So for instance, if I pass out and I want to give the player like different impulses according to the G-forces, we cannot just create 100 animations. We can have like 10 different animations or maybe 5 different animations, and according to the input, in this case the G-forces, we can blend between those assets and play a really nice animation in between them. So we did that for the pass out and wake up, and for the hit reactions it's the same thing. So in that case the inputs are the distance of the impact from the ship, and then how heavy is the thing that is impacting the ship. So it's not the same to be on a Gladius and someone throwing you a fork or throwing you one of the big ass missiles. So we needed some kind of different animations to give the player some kind of feedback for the impacts. Apart from that, we worked on animation-driven IK. Animation-driven IK, we have two different systems in place. One is the limb IK and the other one is the animation-driven IK. The base for both is the same thing, but the way they are activated is different. So for the animation-driven IK, it's the animator who says, I want to use IK at this point in the animation, I don't want to use this IK. So what is the IK for? So when you try to reach an object, or in this case for the cockpit, the throttle and the joystick, or maybe the steering wheel, because those objects are moving, we need the hands to move with them. Otherwise you will see some kind of delay that you can see in other games. So that's why with this IK we can like put together, like glue together the hands and those objects. And that's why the animation-driven IK is for. The limb IK is the same thing, but we activate it in code.
Before the official sprint kicked off, we did about 2-3 weeks with myself, Jay, and the VFX guys just going over various alterations. So we picked the Gladius as the test case because it's used by far the most in squadrons. So you're going to be sat in there for a long period of time. So it needs to be something that's good and an easy place to understand. So we went through so many iterations of, is this seat in the right place? Move the seat up, down, left, right, backwards, forwards, move the screens forwards, move the canopy bars around, move all the buttons. We had a list of 20, 25 actions that we knew we would need in every single cockpit. So that's in the new guidelines. And then there's about another 10, 15 that need to go on the control inputs, so either your stick and throttle or your yoke or any combination of those things. We've built more in for redundancy, so anything in the future that needs an action that currently doesn't, we've got space to do it. We don't need to go back and redo it all again. There was a lot of backwards and forwards with multiple departments on getting to where we are. Whilst we could do this with the old Item 1.0 ships, it would have been a huge amount of sort of throwaway work. So whilst we were in the process of doing the conversion to 2.0 as we started doing this sprint. So we managed to tie them both in together, but with Item 2.0 makes it all incredibly quick, and you set it up for one ship, it takes minutes to set it up on the next ship rather than hours or days having to manually duplicate everything we would have had to have done before. I think the most challenging thing was the amount of ships that we have to deal with, because there were some pretty big decisions we had to make whilst doing it, knowing that if we change this template, that means we have to go revisit 10, 15 ships, and it's getting all the directors and leads on board and agreeing that it's like, if we do this, it's a big change, your department's going to have to do lots of work, but it unifies everything nicely, and in the future, any changes that we have to do, automatically happen across all ships. You don't have to do that change 15 times anymore. You do it once and it just works. But it means you don't get to work on these other cool features, so no one likes going back and feeling like they're redoing stuff, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and revisit what you've done to make things better for the future.
In our game, getting into a seat is not just I press a button and I get in there. No, we need to move the ladder, we need to open the canopy, we need to move the dashboard, we need to move the seat, we need to take a seat, we need to push some buttons. All that sequence, you need the player to be enslaved. And I think that's the most difficult thing in our game, which is, do you play all that sequence and still don't lose control of the entire sequence and the entire thing? Another thing that was quite challenging is the animation-driven IK. We had to basically rework the entire thing that we were using for animations. We had to basically reinvent all the way we were processing all the animations in order to get rid of that one frame delay we were having. So basically, we were having an object, we were having our hand, we were trying to reach this object. So basically the hand was always behind because this hand was moving first, but then the object. So we were always one frame behind. But in the case of this new animation-driven IK, after our changes, what happens now is, because I'm enslaved, my hand is kind of enslaved to this object. I'm gonna leave the object to move first, and then with that up-to-date position, I'm gonna move the hand, and then we are in sync all the time. In this case, it was kind of a brute force, a gigantic email between all the clever people, Chris Roberts, Ivo, Jens, Balti, everyone in the company was trying to get these things right, because this code has been there forever. But if we break this code, nothing is going to work in the game. Absolutely nothing. And everything is going to break. Mannequin is not going to work, the character tool is not going to work, the editor is not going to work, and of course the game is not going to work.
So the plan for right now is to release the various features as part of the Cockpit experience in chunks or phases. So the changes we're making on the Cockpit experience sprint were things that were always kind of in the works. They were always planned to have happened. Really, it's been Chris's vision from the very beginning. But because it required so much attention from so many different teams across the whole project, there was never a considerable focused effort between all those people at the same time to make it happen. And so really it took this kind of gathering of people, coordinating everyone into a sprint structure to get everyone focused all at once into making the Cockpit experience really to the same high quality standard that Chris has had since the very beginning.